I would say that the way that I'm leveraging analytical in leadership roles, past and current, is to refrain from just giving my opinion as just my opinion. I have learned to refine this talent by bringing facts, not just facts, but data before I give a point of view. And I also coach quite a bit to that when I'm coaching C-suite leaders who sometimes confuse their thoughts and opinions in meetings with the data.
Hello and welcome back to Coach Season 3, Secrets of the Strengths. I'm your host, Brandon, and today we are going to be exploring the strength of analytical. With me in the studio, I have Jen and Adriane, and they're going to tell you a bit about themselves before we jump in. So welcome to the show, Jen and Adriane.
Thanks, Brandon.
Thanks, Brandon.
All right, Adriane, you want to start? Give us a little bit about yourself and what you do and who you do it with.
Sure. Happy to. So super excited to be on with you both today. I'm Adriane Massey. I'm here in Atlanta, where I founded Stretch Zone in 2014. I've been coaching since 2014 as a Gallup certified coach and ICF trained. I really coach people who are leaders inside of corporations largely, particularly leaders who have the vice president title or above, who are leading teams of people inside corporate spaces. So I really enjoy that. Outside of the corporate space, I also coach leaders in nonprofit and federal and higher education as well. But our primary focus is with those companies. And let's just face it, there's no shortage of, great leaders. And we really like to, work with them in that way.
Very cool. And Adriane, tell us your top 5.
Sure. So my top 5 are in this order: achiever, maximizer, analytical, intellection, and deliberative.
Excellent. And since we're talking about analytical today, go ahead and give us your present version of how analytical shows up for you.
Well, no surprise, I'm probably going to provide you an analytical answer to that first question. And it goes like this. I use my analytical talent in more of a qualitative way than quantitative way, meaning I've figured out over the years that I probably use data, but I use data not so much in numbers, but I use data in terms of information, patterns of behavior about people, analyzing more people, situations, scenarios than actual numerals, as many analytical people do. They analyze using data that is numeric. So I'd say I'm probably in the more qualitative lane of this talent than many other people I've met.
Very cool. And that's exactly what we're going to do during this season is we're going to take the strengths and we're going to find out the nuances, the differences, the patterns that show up with different strengths. Thank you so much for that intro, Jen. How about you?
Thanks, Brandon. So Jen Pasquale, based out of the DC area. I have been in the training and development space for over 20 years, but a strengths coach since 21. And I founded Lead with Curiosity, where we're actually very, very aligned in the work that we do. So I focus primarily on organizations, working with teams, but then I also work in partnership with organizations that provide things like HR consulting, OD consulting, management consulting, as kind of a bench warmer for them and being able to help serve their clients in ways that maybe they don't have the capacity for around executive coaching and things like that. So that's kind of how I spend my time.
And tell us about your top 5.
So my number 1 is restorative. My number 2 is relator. And then I have intellection, strategic, and analytic. So for folks who know Clifton Strengths, it's a lot of green all together. It's a lot of thinking all together. And so I love, what was just said about the differences in analytic, because for me, it's actually both. I think I love the way you frame that in terms of data around I almost think of it data around human behavior, more so than like data around numbers. I like to do both. I love my numbers. I love my spreadsheets. I can get lost in those and trying to find the patterns there to help make decisions. But I also love kind of that qualitative side too. So I think I kind of look at both angles of it, but I definitely am a data girl. I've always kind of been a data girl. So I definitely use my analytic in that like traditional, I guess, or assumed utilization around kind of data analysis and really looking at that to drive decisions, to look at risk, to really be able to figure out how to go forward and make sure I've gotten all the information I need to make good decisions.
Very cool. Thank you, Jen. And as we're diving into this strength, so this episode, we're going to do a little pull apart. So I'm going to ask you to be thinking about your strength of analytical and as it relates to the other ones around it. I just asked you top 5. I realize most of us use our top 10 or more as it is defined as dominant strengths. And so feel free to intersplice as we go. So you took StrengthsFinder whenever you did it. So many of us took it while it was still called StrengthsFinder, and then StrengthsFinder 2.0, and then it rebranded to Clifton Strengths. So let's go back to the StrengthsFinder moment. You see analytical come up. How did you initially respond? How did you relate? Jen, you can go first on that.
Yeah, I mean, when I saw all of my 5, but certainly my analytic, that had always been, I go back to spreadsheets, right? Like the data had always been a part of my life. In college, I almost was a statistics minor because I just loved statistics and I got just sort of engrossed in it and accidentally fell into it as kind of an interest area. So it wasn't at all a surprise to see that data was a key part of kind of how I was defined under the StrengthsFinder. I actually took it twice, once in 2001 and then again in 21. Not remembering I had done it 20 years prior, I found that report much later, and analytic was on both. So that has been unchanging and very consistent for me.
So with having it stay strong, let's call it in that, I like to call them the sticky ones. You could retake and retake. And because this particular psychometric assessment has very strong retest reliability. So with analytical coming top twice, was it one of those that you say you instantly see it, recognize it, you get it? Or was it one of those so close, hard to see for you?
Yeah, no, it was not hard to see at all. It was definitely very close. Although what I will say is I think analytic has a lot more to it than just data, right? It's a lot more than numbers. And so I think the initial understanding of it was around, of course I love numbers and of course I love spreadsheets, but there's so much more to it, understanding how it impacts pattern finding, how it impacts my kind of risk assessment. Those were kind of layers to it that I had to learn over time. Those were not as kind of natural in my understanding of it.
Okay, very cool. Adriane, over to you. So analytical with your top 5, doing the little pull apart here, how you immediately saw it, where it landed when you first took it.
Right. So when I first saw that analytical was in my top 5, I embraced it. And at the same time, I fully understood how it might drive other people's to frustration, right? So
Okay.
it's kind of, that's the one for me is the analytical talent. To take it all the way back, like Jen, these things kind of show up even in the formative years, college age. I was far from being a statistics major, even thinking about that, but I was a journalism major. And I very much enjoyed root causing anything that appeared to be on the surface one way. I wanted to analyze that, absorb it very quickly, very strategically. So I really was glad to see that probably a path of study that I selected really resonated with my top 5 talents, especially analytical, in terms of let's find the root cause of everything on a deadline every day. So I think that it really is one that I embraced, but let's just face it, probably the people that I had to interview was probably not a joyous day for them.
So we can unpack the bad rap that some of the strengths get as I go through the 34. And I think when coaching analytical or people who have it in their 5, I think there's almost this common understanding that Yeah, I can get under people's skin a little bit with this one. Like this one, because if I can insert for both of you, and either one of you could take this, does this strength require a question after the question after the question? Because it doesn't want to settle for conjecture. It needs what you called root cause. It needs facts. It needs validation. It feeds on that. It needs that in order to establish the rule for going forward. Is there some accuracy to that?
I'd say so. I'd say there is some accuracy in questioning and follow-up questioning. Like the follow-up is nonstop. Once I understood more about this thing, I did become so self-aware that I would refrain from stacking questions. And even though I thought I was stacking questions to get to patterns and root causes, it is not landing the same way on the listener. So I did intentionally work to develop not stacking questions and asking 5 questions in rapid fire pace, not thinking that that's disturbing to people.
I was going to add, Brandon, to my analytic is a sandwich between strategic and deliberative. So, like, if we think about those, right, the deliberative in particular, I think is where if deliberative and my analytic kind of get to run the show is really detailed. It's a lot of layers. It's a lot of questions because that's what those two together are going to want and be most satisfied by. So I have to be careful. And I think that's where I use that strategic as like a bookend to that to help me. Like, okay, now we see the things, what are we going to do about the things, and actually create a little bit of action around it and help keep me from just sitting in it and kind of turning it over and over and over and actually making, no progress at all. So it's to your point in the very beginning, right? It's this combination that really helps it be at its best. And for me, that's making sure I'm bringing something else in to not sit in that for too long.
So how would either of you describe the way your analytical pairs with others? So think about the power pair or pairs, and both of you have deliberative, so you can call that one. I happen to know many people, high analytical, high deliberative. Those two seem to find each other out there. But curious, when you think about this and this show up with my analytical almost always, and that's the Batman, Robin, peanut butter and jelly version that comes through.
Sure. So when I think about the sandwich of my analytical talent, it's sandwiched by maximizer and intellection. But I'm really jazzed about the pairing of analytical and maximizer because that is the opportunity to take the patterns, the data, and apply it to people or situations to move the people or situation from good to better to best. So I get really excited about let's take some rudimentary facts and logic and move it in a direction that is improving something. And that could be people or things. I'm, equally, excited about those opportunities with Maximizer because Maximizer is, all about taking something that's in pretty mint condition and making it better. Better is a subjective word, but I really think that, in coaching, we're really serving the client's agenda. And so whatever their challenge is on that day, let's work towards reaching that goal.
I think for me, there's kind of two pairings that come to mind. One is restorative and analytic, because I think I tend to use my analytic to help me kind of decide if something is really a problem I want to solve in restorative, because that particular talent can be where I sort of, look for or find too many problems. So the analytic gives it some context and gives me some decision making. I think the other one for me is ideation, because my ideation really pairs to help me figure out what do I want to consider? Like, what are the things I want to dig in on and understand and get data for? Where could I take it and what information is going to help me make the decisions? So those are kind of two that come to mind pretty quickly.
So I appreciate that you both selected polar pairings. And I love that maximizer came out for you, Adriane, and restorative came out for you, Jen? Because almost often, and I'll speak from my own experience with seeing thousands of reports in my own version where my maximizer sits at 1 and my restorative at 34, and the number of reports I've seen with them opposite. So you two represent what this season 3 is all about, is just how different one strength can show up because of those amazing pairs around it. And so digging a little deeper, because I want to uncover for us and for our listeners, because we have two of the same. So your deliberative and your analytical may have some similarities of the way it shows up, or analytical if you could ISO it by itself. But once you get it near a maximizer restorative, now we're very different ways that we might see it, we might move it. So curious, as you heard each other, because Adriane, you were describing maximizer with it. Jen, you brought in restorative with that. And either one of you could take this. So just how you heard the difference of how analytical shows up depending on those two strengths in particular.
What if the people you coach could navigate their total health and performance with the same ease as using Google Maps? Our friends at Wellbeing at Work help organizations turn fragmented programs and frustrated employees into thriving, high-performing teams. Wellbeing at Work acts as a GPS to enable total health and peak performance, pinpointing where your people are now, where they want to go, and the best path to get there. With Wellbeing at Work, coaches become credentialed navigators with personalized insights, proven tools, and human-centered support. If you're a coach committed to performance and care, Wellbeing at Work is your path forward. Navigating at scale from burnout to breakthrough is now possible. Visit podcast.34strong.com to find a better way forward to empower a healthier, more energized workforce. Again, that's podcast.34strong.com, Wellbeing at Work.
I think, what's funny to me is Maximizer, going back to the repeat that I did, Maximizer used to be in my top 5. So in that first report, Maximizer was in my top 5. And then I think my analysis of that is that I was in my early, not my early 20s, but yeah, I guess my early 20s. I was hungry. I was in a new career. I really wanted everything to be just a certain way. And so that was what I think drove that for me in that season. But it fell pretty far, like into the 20s for me. And restorative is what sort of showed up in its place. So it was like it was problem solving and it was making things better, but it was doing so with just through a different lens. So I think what I thought was funny as you were talking is about just for me, it used to be that it was there for me too, but now I do it in just a different way. But in so many ways, we're still looking at different layers where our motives are just different. It's about that motivation that's underneath it that really is the nuance to each of those pairings.
I think, Jen, you're spot on with, what's the motivation, what's the intent, and I have so much respect with people who are especially talented in restorative because it really is a talent that has a patience for wanting to repair something that may be broken. And, my intent begins with mint condition forward. I'd say if this were an HGTV show, I would be the last person to want to rehab a house. But I fully respect those who enjoyed rehabbing a house, right? So I think that it's really the fact that we can all be at any point on that yardstick of movement, and that the more we can recognize where our sweet spot is, the more that we can really collaborate with people on a team, in a department, when everyone knows what their talents are. I think it's about really raising a lot of respect across the team and reducing judgment because there's different areas of talent and they just kind of have different starting points. The great thing is we're all trying to see improvement and create a trajectory of improvement.
Very cool. All right. So now I'm going to ask you to put your analytical to work. So Jen, thank you so much for providing the case study. And here's what we're going to do. So Jen just reported out that first time she took strengths, maximizer shows up high. Second time, replaced by restorative, maximizer drops. I'd like the two of us, or the three of us, to analyze why did that happen? So Jen, you gave us your hypothesis, okay? And understanding the way this psychometric assessment works, it's measuring the way that we think, the way we feel, the way we behave, and it's ordering them in intensity. And so when something pops up in the top 5, it's very intense for that time. And there's been a lot of questions and research around what does brain science tell us, brain plasticity and how people change, and what age were you, career, life, family, all these things. So how would you analyze that shift? And Adriane, I'm going to start with you on that.
How would I analyze Jen's shift in that?
Yeah, just if you were asking questions, you're putting your
Right.
analytical to work, how would you start to understand that and bring that to a place where we can arrive at some sort of hypothesis theory together as we think about it?
Sure. So the first question that comes to mind that I would pose to Jen is, tell me about a time when you were highly successful, really in a wonderful rhythm and joy of work, when you felt that your maximizer was on fire. I would ask questions like that because, to Brendan's point, I'm trying to pinpoint with the person I'm coaching what time of their life or career did that happen, and to try to see what was surrounding those circumstances, you know. And then the opposite of the question would be, tell me about a time when you were very frustrated, perhaps, with having a lot of analyses or data, but you were really frustrated in the experience of the work that you were doing or even how you were being managed. But I would zone in on a time of high success and a zone of huge frustration to see what clues might be inside those answers.
I like that. Jen, do you want to give any answers to those?
Sure. So it's funny. This is where I feel like it's a case study also in why it's so important for anyone or an organization to not just let their people do strengths and put it to the side, because I did it as part of onboarding and I never met with a coach. I never talked to anyone about it. I don't know that I really ever even had a chance to digest what it meant, because I never worked with someone who could go the next layer with me, right? It was just surface level understanding. So I don't even know at the time if I really understood what it meant, because ironically, it wasn't impactful. I forgot I'd ever done it until 20 years later. So if I were to imagine back in that time, what I think is the biggest factor for me was really becoming a parent. I think I think parenting kind of, and not just parenting, but, becoming a spouse, right? Essentially becoming responsible, to an environment that is not just about me anymore as a single person as I was at the time. So I think as I aged and became a spouse and became a parent, then I think that maximizer just didn't have enough oxygen. And what got in its place was the restorative, because it, for whatever reason, right, it just felt more accessible. I could still problem solve, but I didn't need to make it perfect. I didn't need to kind of make it the best it could possibly be. I was okay settling for good, because that was what life kind of demanded of me, or at least that's how I probably felt. That's how I've always kind of summarized it for myself as to why that shift happened and what that looks like now.
I love that you're sharing from the life experiences, because that's often in test retest cases that I've evaluated myself, where you find those big life markers that are creating pivot points, and yet some of the strengths endure regardless, right? They're the ride or dies, if you will. You couldn't unbe them if we paid you, kind of strengths. But then there's these other ones that they live in the realm of learned behaviors. They live in the realm of growth strengths, supportive strengths. And so we can turn them off. We can replace. And I think early in the time that I was learning about strengths, maybe you all have this similar experience, it was very rigid. It's very rigid about what it could be, what it wasn't. And the word was, we should always go back to the first results for the most accurate results. And I've just found in my years of working with this, that's in some cases very much not true, very much not in line with who they are. What do you think about that, Adrian?
Well, I think there's a lot of value in looking in the rearview mirror of different turns in life and different changes and just key mile markers. I can recall that the first time my analytical talent became more profound and more recognizable was the first time that I became a people leader. And after that, the first time I became a vice president and was responsible for a department of business and a line of business. And the way that came out with the people who reported to me was, oh, well, Adrian, it just seems like you're being critical. And that was just so, at the time, at first that was hard to digest because I really, truly, sincerely felt I was making remarks and comments and suggestions that would make the thing better. I thought I was in process improvement lane, but it didn't always land that way to people as I was leading the people. So I did, really take the time to work on my blind spots of analytical, meaning it can land on some people as negative or critical. But that's not the intent. The intent really is for improvement and to kind of plumb the depths of the data or the information uh, for good. But it became more glaring when I stepped into people leadership.
So thank you for that, Adrian. And thinking about people leadership, right? Some of the greatest tests. So whether, Jen, in your case, starting the family, being promoted into a leadership role, I find that leadership is one of the crucibles for our strengths. I mean, it really tests you because until there are followers, your feedback loop still is going to center around self. And once you introduce followers who now can provide you actual feedback, now your strength is being exposed, if you will. So curious from both your perspectives. So this is now clearly dominant. You both have had it very strong. It's endured the test retest. So now it's sticking. It's got other friends around it helping it. How are you leveraging this strength best to be effective in leadership roles?
I would say that the way that I'm leveraging analytical in leadership roles, past and current, is to refrain from just giving my opinion as just my opinion. I have learned to refine this talent by bringing facts, not just facts, but data before I give a point of view. And I also coach quite a bit to that when I'm coaching C-suite leaders who sometimes confuse their thoughts and opinions in meetings with the data. And so another way of saying that is let another tool communicate so that you're not perceived as, oh, that's just your opinion, but actually lay out the data that supports your premise and let that tool speak. I think that leaders get far more accomplished when they are able to preface their point of view with some actual data, and they're not as dismissed as quickly, perhaps, as trying to lead without the data.
I think the what I've seen from a leader perspective in myself and others is just having access to options that feel evidence-based, I think tends to change the dialogue a little bit. So a little bit of, of what's already been said, but I think that options piece is the part that I really have latched onto the most in terms of helping me not just see the options. I think there's some other talents that may help me see them, but really then put some thought behind what are the best options? Why are they the best options? What are the risks that are associated here? How are we going to mitigate those? So being able to kind of think not only based on what do we see right now, but then what does it look like as we move forward? What is the thing we want to be watching for? So I think all of those things for me kind of play into how it shows up from a leadership perspective.
Awesome. So now I'm going to ask you both this question. And I love how you said it earlier, Jen, about the strength needing oxygen and what it needs to flourish and be at its best. So when we think about analytical and we think about where and how and what it does to be most effective, and you both described that really well in your respective leadership capacities. But in the space where strengths have an ideal setting, and it helps when one is aware of, this is when you get the best of my strength. This is when I'm going to get frustrated. This is when I'm going to be challenged. And I have found with this strength, and I would be happy to be countered if this isn't accurate, but I have found with analytical that it does not suffer fools well. that, that analytical does not appreciate when they're where we're going with ideas or thoughts that we're not thoroughly researching. There isn't enough time given to really think through the situation. And I have often found with leaders, that's where it pulls them back. It pulls them into this space where it's almost a withdrawal of energy, withdrawal of the idea of, well, if you're not going to listen or give me the time, then why am I putting it out there for you? And I'm curious if you've seen any of that, or how we can best give this strength the oxygen it needs to be successful.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that. And I think from both myself and I think what I've seen, that it is really about honoring the time, right? The more you understand your own strength, the more you understand these about yourselves, the more you can, it's back to bring in need. Like, what do I need from my environment in order to bring the best of this? I need time and space. I need thinking to be perceived as productive, not just task completion. And so I'm going to need this space to think about it. And I may not make a decision immediately because I'm going to need that space to kind of consider, again, the options. So yeah, I guess that's what comes to mind for me, is that time and space is so important. And if we're not getting it, it's on us to ask for it. It's on us to say, this is what I need in order to bring this thing that we know is valuable to this team. This is what I'm going to need from you, from the team, from the situation.
Coaches and service-based business builders want to 10x your impact and income? Join the Strengthspreneur Mastermind, led by Brent O'Bannon, MCC, author of the Strengthspreneur 10X Workbook, and the world's first Gallup-certified strengths coach. This powerhouse group gives you personalized coaching, peer support, and proven tools to launch and scale your unique strengths. We meet 2 times a month. Come sharpen your strategy, boost confidence, and grow smarter, not harder. Visit podcast.34strong.com to thrive as a strengthspreneur. Again, visit podcast.34strong.com. Join Brent O'Bannon and thrive as a strengthspreneur.
So when it comes to how to get the best of me, and I certainly often coach to this as well with the analytical talent, a person would get the best of me when we are having a conversation that has a linear pattern to it. And the opposite of that would create lots of frustration for me or some people with the analytical talent, would be a conversation that moves in a circular motion. The other person is just not able to land the plane. They're all over the place. Therefore, we're just not moving towards a finish line. And that is highly frustrating. So not only are they moving and talking in circles, the content is not rooted in anything seemingly rational or logical. So I would thrive best in situations that are rooted in some type of data or rationale or logic and are moving in a linear direction. I see this most in the workplace, in workplaces with meetings that last twice as long as they ought to. The meeting ought to be 30 minutes, but for some reason, it goes into a 2-hour meeting. Lack of an agenda, lack of clearly who's speaking to what along the agenda, lack of next steps. These types of things, just a pure lack of planning before the meeting, can really throw something a loop. And I see this every day in all types of industries, marquee companies and not, that sometimes they really get hijacked, per se, by that roundabout, circular, unplanned situation that people create. And it is incredibly frustrating for those who are more linear driven, and in particularly for those who are especially talented with the analytical thing.
Oh my, death by meeting. I think you just took every one of us listeners included on the, we're all shaking our head. We're like, this meeting could have been an email. It really could have been an email. And the agenda-less meetings with no end in sight. They keep going. Yeah. Okay. So now I'm going to ask you both to dig into your strengths for a second. And I want you to discern when you sabotage yourself. So some of our own strengths actually counteract each other, sometimes in a good way, they balance, but other times they actually keep the other one from doing what we want it to do. So I think, Jen, you shared ideation, right? Ideation's up there, and ideation wants maybe sometimes to do the circular thing that Adriane just described. While she's talking, I'm like, ooh, she's describing ideation. or other strengths that's the journey, right? It's the discovery. So balancing that ideation with like, how do I wrestle it to the ground? Or Adriane, for you, because you lead with achiever. And so sometimes achiever's like, let's go now. I got stuff to do. Do you not see my clock? I got stuff in my head. I'm running through my to-do list. So curious for the sake of our listeners, because we all have strengths that counterbalance. And sometimes they cross over in ways that we're like, hold on, wait a minute. I sound like two people right now. I got to wrestle this one to get that one working and get them cooperating. And curious how you both do that with the knowledge you have of strengths.
Well, one of the ways that I see that two of my talents wrestle with each other at times would be the analytical talent wrestles with the deliberative talent, because the analytical talent wants to say, let's gather all, not some, all of the information, all of the data that we need in order to what? Make an informed decision, right? And deliberative, really can be, very cautious, very careful. But the reality is, in the workplace, especially in senior and executive leadership, there are times when you must move on without all of the data, without all of the information you ideally want. You simply do not have the luxury of time. And, that's when those talents that have already wrestled just get a little disappointed. Like, oh, I'm just going to have to call it. I'm going to have to put a stake in the ground. We have to move on, simply because we don't have the luxury of time for analytical and deliberative in their own way to kind of, stifle the process.
Okay, so real talk, how does that work? Do you consciously have to think that way? Like, all right, analytical, you're done, or like, is that just something now that you're present enough to it, you're conscious enough to how the pattern's moving, that now you've created a new pattern of how they have to combine?
Well, I think how it really plays out in an ideal situation is, okay, I'm going to need to prioritize what is the information I must have versus the nice to have. So at times you really have to strip it down to nice to have information, as in nice to have data. Like, and then the maximizer is roaming in the background, which, really wants things to be pretty perfect. And so that has to settle down to this comment. Sometimes good enough is just good enough. We're going to have good enough data, good enough time. We're just going to have to do that, because
you're describing my activator maximizer.
Oh, okay,
right now.
Sure, of course.
So it's good enough. We gotta go.
It's good enough. Let it go. Let it go. So, there's, I've over time learned how to, unpry the grip on that, and that you just must release it. It must go on, because in a business, there's a speed to business, and deliberative could slow it down, and analytical could speed it up if it just had everything it needed. But, it's kind of like a brake and an accelerator. And some days, as a leader, you just have to say, good enough is good enough. We're going with it.
Very cool. Thank you. Jen, how about you?
Yeah, so I would add the two that came to mind when you were asking the question is really the ones that pull me out of that kind of deep analytic tendency is merely my activator. And for me, it's the combination is about, for me, a deadline. So if there's something I know I'm kind of circling around analytically, then it is setting a line in the sand where by X, I have to make a decision. I have to move forward. I have to do something until then that I can kind of enlist the activator to make that happen. I think the other one that helps in that same kind of dialogue with myself is futuristic. So having that in my top 10, it tends to be the thing that gets me excited about whatever I'm analyzing data for, right? I'm trying to make a decision, but then I can get excited about the decision through that lens. And that also can help kind of create that pull out of, being paralyzed by that analysis.
Does your activator analytical ever square off and go at it? I mean, those are another one of those pairs that I have seen them together, but every time I do, I wonder how in the world does that work side by side or even in the same, space.
I think it does for me in like it's in the dialogue that I have with myself, right? It's about kind of it's about setting any of those fears I might have about not analyzing enough or about missing something. I think where the activator sort of gets its energy is in my conversation with myself around good enough, around we have enough, around we need to move forward, around it's going to be okay if it's not perfect. Right. So I think that's where I feel like the activator comes in. So I don't know that I feel like they really square off very often. I think if I'm being honest, I think the activator is the one I probably struggle to sort of see as intentionally as among my 10, it's probably the one I struggle to notice as intentionally and call on as intentionally, but I suspect I'm doing it and I'm just not labeling it that.
Good. All right. Well, we are rounding the bend. I want to thank you both for joining us, Season 3, Coach to Coach, Secrets of the Strengths. And this is a chance. I just want our listeners to know a little more about you. So if you could tell them what you're doing, who you're doing it with, and just a little more elaboration on where they can find you. That's one of the nice benefits of being on the show is a whole market full of people out there that love strengths, that love to hear from all of the experts we're bringing on. So Jen, how about you? Where can people find you, and what might you want them to know about you?
So leadwithcuriosity.co is my site, and I'm on LinkedIn, so you can find me there. I think I was laughing as you asked that question because I realized my answer is an analytic answer, which is that the work that I really am loving right now is work around the engagement analysis tool that Gallup has. So I use that tool with clients to help us get the data, get the understanding that we need in order to design the interventions that are really going to drive change. But first, we have to ask the questions and have the information. So it's a very analytic approach, and that's probably why I love it. But that's the work that I'm really enjoying the most right now, using it for everything from one-off offsites to kind of long-term strategy with an organization.
Adriane.
Well, you can find Strength Zone on LinkedIn. You can find me, Adriane Massey, on LinkedIn, and where I post regularly about lots of exciting strengths-based topics. I really am enjoying supporting companies, the leaders inside of companies, with unpacking very complex situations, team-based approaches, how to use the data to really organize specialized teams. Team doesn't mean departments. And so, we are having a blast getting organizational leaders at the top to rethink how to deploy their talent based on their talents and not based on what department they sit in. We're having lots of success in several different industries and in the federal space about how to use this data and not let it sit on the shelf and collect dust, but let's use it every day and how we can really maximize the talent in the organization. So it's a great tool for that, as well as for employee engagement and retention.
Awesome. I want to thank you both so much for being on the show for Season 3. And any big plans coming up? Any big events you're planning to attend? Things that our listeners might clue into that you have that we can share some of our insights?
No, my next big attend is a Gallup event, or not a Gallup event, a strengths coach event that I'm going to, and I'm also part of the WeBank certification, so the women business owners, and so I'm going to that conference later this year. So looking forward to engaging with organizations that are going to be there in New Orleans, I think. So
Thanks, Adriane. Anything coming up for you?
Yeah, same here. I'll see you, Jen, in New Orleans at WeBank, and excited to be a woman-owned business, certified in that manner, and to keep moving forward.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much again. And listeners, I hope you enjoyed learning deeper and more relevant and interesting knowledge about the strengths, and in particular for this episode, Analytical. We look forward to seeing you next time on Coach to Coach, the Strengths Whisperer.
That's a wrap on this episode of Coach to Coach. If you've enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you're a strengths coach looking to dive deeper, join the Coach Strong community. It's where coaches like you come together to share insights, support one another, and discover partnership opportunities. Be part of the conversations that are elevating our industry. Email community@34strong.com to join today. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next week on Coach to Coach. Stay strong.